I'm going to attempt to do this very gently because I've been in bed for the last 3 days with some kind of bug or infection, 36 hours of which I was in agonizing pain, really agonizing pain. And so when you're in that state of just feeling really in excruciating pain and unwell, really the only thing you can do in those moments is surrender and let go. And I think it's a very natural response to also, when you're in a state of like, I can't bear it anymore. I really can't bear it anymore. I mean, I had a moment where I was just wailing, crying, even though it was so painful because my head just felt like it was being electrocuted. There was really this like, please, Creator, like make it stop. I cannot endure anymore. And yet, I knew that I would get through it because everything changes. But I think it's a natural response to be like, well, what if I were to die right now? Because when you feel like you can't endure anymore, I think it's a natural thought, what if I were to die right now? And I recognized that I wasn't so much afraid of death as I was afraid. And I say afraid, but it's not quite the right word, but afraid of pain. Or it was just the pain that felt unendurable. And I'm strong, I'm tough, I can take a lot of pain. And so it prompted me to ask this question of like, well, are we really afraid of death? Or is it the pain that we define around it? And, for some it might be more of an existential question or dilemma even. But what I want to dive into today is just, I think when I have these experiences, it zooms out and broadens the perspective, of like, why are we here and what are we doing and what is this all and who are we and where do we come from and all of that jazz. So I want to talk about, well, existence and these points that we reach that I think almost propel us beyond just our humanity into a vaster state of being. So this is what I want to attempt to explore today. So let's dive in. This is Corinne Bloom, and you're listening to Raw Conversations. There's something so humbling when you're unwell. At least for me, I just find it such a humbling experience because I don't know, I guess, I don't get sick too often, but I definitely have memories of, falling ill when I was younger, and maybe there was a part that would kind of fight against it. And then I remember, this was several years ago, I had some kind of flu or something like this. And I remember it was actually quite a spiritual experience because it was the first time where I really just allowed it. I just allowed it. I wasn't resisting it. I wasn't fighting it. I wasn't going into, I felt awful. I felt absolutely hideously terrible. I remember that. But it was like I really learned what it was like to soften into it. And, I had learned already how to soften into physical pain, being a professional ballet dancer. And I remember when I ran a yoga wellness center in London, we'd have all of these different therapies. And so sometimes we'd get treatments. And I remember my back went out and I think it was a Grinberg session. And I remember, she'd really dig into the sore spot and just be like, breathe into it, relax into it. And I think this is very much why I use this phrase a lot in my work of, are you in a point of tension or relaxation? And we can be going through hard things and be relaxed. The tension is the resistance. The tension is the story that we make about it. And I think, we're human, and this experience is very, very, very intense. And, I've heard many times that it's like, why do we choose to come into human form? You could look at it from, beyond this realm. Why would beings that experience unity and unconditional love. Like, why would we choose to incarnate into this human form where there's suffering and pain and hardship and duality and all of this stuff? And it's like, well, because it's very interesting, right? It's very, very interesting. And this is why I've always really believed that emotions are perfectly designed in us. I think there's an absolute reason. I think that, we're learning, if you haven't paid attention over these years especially, we're learning that so much of our reality is really an inversion. So whatever is kind of said of like, don't do this, don't have feelings, guard your heart, don't open your heart. It's the opposite. You can pretty much go with the opposite of what is being said. And I always felt like emotions were something that are incredibly wise, like wisdom holders and keys to our blueprint, to the map of who we are. And so then, if you zoom out and you look at incarnation, it's like, well, that's really interesting and kind of intense that you can have all these emotions. But then I go, but what about the pain? Like that shit just ain't fun. Like that just ain't fun, And I've had my fair share of physical and emotional pain. And I know some people that really battle with a lot of physical pain. Or people that just endure so much. I mean, even just if you kind of watch videos or hear stories of people, it's remarkable what humans undergo. It's really, really remarkable. And at the same time, it's like beautiful. Beautiful because when you can see the resilience of humanity, when you can see the resilience of just some kind of faith or light that comes in, that perseveres, it is a beautiful journey. And I was going to say metamorphosis, but it's not even just metamorphosis. It's really just the journey as it ebbs and flows, and it goes up and down, and it goes through so many different, it makes for an interesting script, right? If it were a film, it makes it very interesting. The characters are interesting. The storyline is interesting. And so I imagine that's why we choose to come here. But sometimes when it comes to the pain, I'm just like, really, do we have to keep on doing this? Because when you're unwell, I don't know about you, but for me, I think, well, God, we're really poorly designed in this way. It's like we're so sensitive and it feels so kind of almost volatile. And as I'm saying that, I'm acutely aware that if our environment was more conducive for health, we would be fine. We would be fine. But when you look at what's being pumped into the air, when you look at the quality of our water, even just the noise pollution, for 8.5 years, I lived in the deep countryside, and it was literally crickets, and the occasional tractor or car that drove by. And these last 6 months, as I've been, well, longer than that, but traveling and moving and living in a new place, and I've been in kind of like more populated areas and almost more urbanized. And I tell you, especially being sick, I'm like, how do people bear this noise all the time? And it really is like a numbing of the senses. And sometimes I think, oh God, ignorance is bliss, or just, kind of sleepwalking through life, or not being very sensitive. That must be blissful because none of this stuff bothers you. But then I think, but it must be on a deeper level. And the truth is that even though sometimes there's a right old pain in the ass, I do want to be attuned and sensitized to. But then I find like living in a more urban environment, it really strains my nervous system when there's constantly an incessant noise. So it's all interesting. And I'm kind of thinking, well, can we evolve beyond the pain point and the suffering point? I think that was another thing that came up for me, is that, I've got a lot of challenges in my life. I have a lot of responsibility. And so I was thinking about just our paradigms and our beliefs and all of these things. And it's like, okay, I don't want to play out the paradigm and the belief structure of struggle anymore. I don't want that. I don't want to identify with that. And, I can feel how even in these past weeks, like one of the biggest challenges where I am now is traffic. And in the beginning, it really got to me. It really got to me, and it really triggered my anger and frustration and exasperation. And then I kind of turned a corner and I was like, right, I have to accept that this is what it is. This is my reality right now. And so I'm just going to move through it with as much grace as possible. And, I'm like learning a new language. So I'm listening to my recordings and just trying to take the time to be with my daughter in the commute. At the same time, at the end of that, it really is exhausting. It really does take a toll. But, making these small choices of that's what it is. It's a choice to respond differently to our reality, to our circumstances. And so part of that is right, I don't want to be in the frustration. I don't want to be in this well, this is hard or this is a struggle, right? And I think we've grown very accustomed to in our society that's almost revered. Oh, you're busy. Life is hard. You're stressed. So that's a good thing. That means you're really busy. And it's no, all of these things are just, I would say, a way of keeping us contracted and small. And so if I come back to the beginning of this, it's well, our natural state of being is actually very expansive. And we had to come into this small container to have this human experience. But what I always call as the arc of being human is we come in through the veil of amnesia. We forget, I think there's an element where we still remember as babies. I had conscious memories of being in the birth canal, which I'm sure I've shared, and I might mention it in a moment, but we are still connected, but then we forget. And we forget, and we go through the human experience of having a wound and these emotions and sensations and interpersonal relational dynamics and, hopes and desires and disappointments and fear and loss and grief and, the whole spectrum, the gamut, the emotional palette, right? And then the beauty of the arc of being human is the invitation to go back inwards, to remember what we've always known and to remember who we've always been. And there's something that's very interesting and elevating about that for the soul. And in that process, the soul gets to grow, right? But I think now more than ever, as we're moving through this time of remembrance, for me, it's much more of a remembrance than an awakening. Yes, it's an awakening because some people are still having to awaken to the illusion and the inversion, as I called it earlier, of how things are a little bit upside down or not as they appear. So yes, there's an element of awakening, but for me, the most direct point, beyond all of that, is, do you remember who you are? And so then when you have these moments of, illness or injury or extreme pain, which bring you so into the present moment and bring you into a state where you can either fight or surrender. You can either struggle or let go. And, I feel like I have enough tools in my kit to even though I had moments of just agony where I was pleading, please make it stop, please, I cannot bear it anymore. There was still this knowing, this wiser part of me that's you'll get through it. It might feel like you're going to die of pain, but you're going to get through it. And then all you can do is just okay, I soften into it. And then also somehow, somewhere in the back thinking, all right, to my soul, this seems a bit cruel, but to my soul, this is kind of an interesting ride. So it's also the remembering of, I'm not this body. Even though the experience is it's real. It is real, right? I'm not this body. I'm beyond that. And so that was when I was met with the question of well, am I afraid of death? I honestly didn't feel there was maybe a moment of the ego being no, I'm not ready. I mean, not that I was going to die, but I'm just using it as an example. But there was a moment where my ego goes, no, I'm not ready. Or of course, the things of I don't want to leave my daughter behind or all of that. But if I were to set those things aside, there really was a sense of peace, because for me, death is just waking up from the dream. Death is going back home. This is the illusion. This is the dream, right? This is the game, whatever you want to call it. And so then it brought me back to this question of, are we afraid of death, or are we afraid of the pain that we associate with the process of dying? And I suppose also to the ego, if it goes into that kind of existential dilemma, that is a pain unto itself. It is a death unto itself, right? It doesn't want to die because it believes I will cease to exist. But the soul is infinite and immortal. Consciousness is infinite and immortal. It cannot die. It cannot. This body, sure, but we are not the body. And, how would our experience of life be if we weren't afraid of death? I know that, Darius Wright talked about that because he had so many out-of-body experiences, and people that have had near-death experiences, they all talk about it being like really peaceful and lovely. And, there's really nothing to fear. It's so much harder for the people that are left behind, because we're in the emotional body and we're in separation, and we're not in that kind of infinite state of immortality. We feel the finiteness of this experience. But, I'm really grateful that when I was younger, in my kind of teenage, and especially I think in my 20s, I did a lot of reading. And, I had a Buddhist practice then, which I've shared. I ran into the limitations of it, but, I really appreciated the old Eastern ways of, death was a part of culture. Death is a part of life. And so there wasn't this same fear of death. It was more just like another rite of passage. It's just another transition. It's another doorway that you walk through. But in our Western world, there is so much fear of death. And then the irony is that the fear of death is really what inhibits life. And that's truly sad, because then you're kind of living to try to not die rather than just live. Like, death is inevitable. I think it was Elizabeth Gilbert, the author, that said, the only thing that we know for certain in life is that we'll die. That is the only thing that we absolutely 100% know for certain. We just don't know when, which is what conjures up the fear. But it's the only thing that is like it's gonna happen. And yet why we spend so much of our lives fearing it, I really see that as such a great inhibitor for life itself. And yes, of course, there's a biological, instinctual trigger, you could say, that is there for our protection, so that we don't do something stupid and kill ourselves. Of course, like, that's really good. But it's gone more into the emotionality of our experience and the mental aspect of our experience, where we're fearing something that is actually it's as natural as birth, right? And don't even get me started on that. There's so much kind of that has been, I don't know, the word polluted comes into my mind, of just the birthing process and the birthing industry, and the fear that's been injected into that as well, when it's such a miraculous process, So there's so much that we need to kind of zoom out from, and really, can you remember who you truly are? So a lot of the time when I'm connecting people into themselves, if I'm working with them, eventually it's the point of, can you connect to your essence? The essence of who you are, which is an energy, because the energy is consciousness, is your soul, is your essence, is your spirit, is the infinite immortal self. And it can only be felt. It can really only be felt. It's not something that's logical or rational. It doesn't reside in the mind. It resides in the feeling state. And I truly believe that heart is one of the biggest portals. You could say also the crown chakra, or there's a whole, system in the solar plexus. But for me, the heart is such an amazing gateway, because it's expansive. And I think if we can learn how to access our heart and come into that compassionate nature that is the heart, we can naturally tap into that state of expansion. And that's why I find it really useful to bring that into your daily practice of, I don't even like to call it meditation anymore, because meditation has such a connotation of, how it should be, and you shouldn't be thinking, and you shouldn't have thoughts, and should be really still, and all of these rules, right? And so what I call it is just, it's my time to be with. It's my being with me time, where I just sit and I be and I feel and I listen. And, you know, if you can have a practice where you do that daily and you connect into your heart, you will naturally find, especially if you do it consistently every single day, and you keep on coming back to heart, and you keep on coming back to heart, you keep on doing it with consistency, is you will feel that natural state of expansion. And it feels so lovely and warm and gentle and pure and loving. I remember in my 20s, I did a couple week-long silent Vipassana retreats. And always by the end of the retreat, everyone would basically be having that feeling of just unconditional love and heart expansion. And there's a reason why they call it expansion, because the heart has the vastest magnetic field. I think it's 9 feet or something. It's like vast, right? And that's what's measurable. So I think that is an amazing portal to then come through into the essence of who we are, which is like infinite, 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 you know, beyond just 9 feet, right? It's, you know, can stretch to the borders of all galaxies, not even just our own. And I think, you know, coming back to these times in this remembrance, it's kind of vital importance to really recognize that we are not just this human vessel. That this is an amazing tool. It's an amazing vehicle, and it's one that needs to be revered and respected and taken care of. You know, how we take care of our vehicle, how, you know, the purity of the food and the water and the care, what we put into our consciousness, all of that is so vitally important. But I do feel like we're coming into at least a slightly more, dare I say, mainstream conversation that this is the truth. This isn't just some spiritual woo-woo shit. This is coming into more of a normal language that as we're awakening and remembering, it's like, oh, right. Like we're even, you know, pulling back the illusions of our history, you know, of how Homo sapiens became, you know, and it's not just about this, you know, because scientists can't explain the leap, right? The just like quantum leap that came in. And so you have to look at it from different angles. And I'm not going to go into that because it's not my area of expertise. And I think that's something that deserves just your own curiosity and research. But basically, this is a time of expansion. It's a time of expansion and of remembrance. And I think why I've focused so much in my career around authenticity and realness, rawness. That's why I call these like raw conversations. It's like, okay, how do we just be real and raw in this experience of being both human and divine? Is because I think this, you know, what is authenticity? Authenticity is sovereignty. Authenticity is truth. Authenticity at its core is love. And it drops all facades. It drops all masks. It drops all shoulds and shouldn'ts. It drops all belief systems and opinions and paradigms, and it drops all of that because it really just is the isness of being. That to me is what authenticity is. It's not like, oh, I'm going to be authentic because that's to be, you know, it's a cool thing to do nowadays. It's to be authentic and to be uniquely you. Yeah, that's great. But I want to really go into the profound nature. The profundity of the word authenticity is really dropping into a deeper truth and expanding into the deeper truth of who you are. Not just as this person, not just as your character and personality that has a name. Mine's Corinne. You know, and that gives me the vehicle to have this experience. So I'm not going to belittle it at all. It's amazing, right? It's an amazing partnership and union. But that's just such a small part of it. So life, it's really easy for life to get kind of serious, right? And I find that I have a finite amount of energy. And it doesn't take me a long time before things can really make me tired. I'm noticing that. I don't know if it's because I had mononucleosis when I was a teenager, or if that's just a part of my, like, I find this planet really tiring. But I think, where was I going with this? It escaped me. It'll come back around, as it does. But I think that, as we're connecting into these truths of who we truly are, there's a sense of energy that comes in. There's a sense of knowing what it is that we need, what it is that fuels us, what it is that that really brings meaning into our life. Because a lot of it has just been a lot of noise for a long time. And I think that's where it is. Okay, it's come back in. We can really focus on the time. I'm not belittling it, but we can focus on our day-to-day life, right? So what I was going to say is that, like, I'm quite tired because it's been about a year of movement of some sort for me, and I'm really, really ready for home. And so that's a reality, right? We're dealing with our human part of us that has these needs, right? Just basic fundamental needs, and they need to be honored, and they need to be looked after and tended to with care. And at the same time, I find it really helpful to be able to zoom out into the macro so that we don't get so caught up in the micro that we think this is all there is, and then life becomes really dramatic, or it pulls us back into that struggle. It pulls us back into, like, oh my God, this is hard. Or, one thing that I feel I think I've turned a corner on it, folks. I'm really happy about this. I think for the most part, I've let go of the process of fear and anxiety and worry. And, I've been tested so many times this year. And this is the thing. It's like it's persistence, especially when we're kind of breaking old habits. It's persistence of making a new choice. When people work with me and sometimes they're like, it's not changing. My life isn't changing. Why isn't it changing? This work isn't working for me. I can't do it. I'm like, yeah, but are you still making the same choices? If you're still making the same choices, of course you're going to get the same results. Of course you are. And so of course your life is still going to be the same. It doesn't matter who you work with, what method you use. If you still continue to make the same choices and put yourself in the same point of suffering, nothing will change. And this is where we do have power, aka also self-responsibility. Our choices are powerful. And sometimes, that deserves compassion as well, and patience, because sometimes we're habituated to make those choices. We're habituated to have that fear response or anxiety response or control response or insecurity response or whatever it might be for you. But, the reason why I always begin with awareness is once you become aware of it, then you can eventually make a different choice. And so I felt myself go through this process of fear and anxiety every time there was this kind of like, where am I going to live? To the point where now I'm really in the state of trust, and also just knowing it's a waste of my energy to go into fear. Like, something will work out. Something will work out. It'll be fine. And I don't think it's delusion. I think it's just really, what if I was being taken care of? And what if life is happening for me? So, when we begin to make different choices and we move through the habitual patterns, whether it was ours or our ancestors or collective or societal or parental, whatever it is, we begin to, I think it's always like a peeling back of the layers that keep us in this little box, that keep us in that state of contraction and tension. Which has been primarily put on us because of being in a fear-based paradigm. And I do believe that we're moving outside of that now. I do believe that it's like we can let go of that. We can let go of those kind of energies. And I do believe that the way that you let go of is not by getting rid of, but by transmuting. And so you have to face your fear. You can't just go, oh no, I'm just going to pretend that that's not there. You have to learn to embrace them. You have to sit in the fire with your fear. And you transmute it and you alchemize it through the being with and through the embracing and through the loving. I love I've been reading the Gene Keys, Richard Rudd's Gene Keys. And, I know I've shared this before, that I really resonate with. He talks about everything is in its trinary, everything is in trinities. And so he always has these 3 steps, you go from the shadow to the gift to the city. And, he even talks about, the third that comes in from the 2. And he was even, I was listening to a talk, he was even talking about how when you come from higher consciousness, you have to lose a strand, the 3rd strand of DNA, to come into the double helix, to come into this lower density. And I find that when I'm writing, I will often write in 3s. And I remember having this feedback of like, you don't need to say 3 things. But it's like, yeah, but that somehow feels very natural for me. Somehow feels very important to me. And I've always looked at it when I'm writing and I was like, oh, could I get rid of that one? And I'm like, no, I don't want to. For me, there's something that really solidifies a point when it comes in 3. Don't ask me why, but I do think, he was saying you see it encoded through everything, this trinity. Which I think is beautiful, because it's almost like there's you in relationship to what is, and then there's the 3rd point, which is the observer of it all. And when you can hold the consciousness of those 3 points, I think that is real, true awareness. I'm going a little bit out there now. So reining it back in. I think in these times that are really intense, and our human desires are very strong, our human needs are very strong, we're still dealing with longing and yearning and suffering and struggle and stress and chaos and hardship and all of these things. I think it's a really good place, a point of thought to ponder upon and to contemplate with. Is this like really coming back to, who are you? Why are you here? Why did you come here? And it's not even so important that you find all of the answers right away. I always thought it was funny that what is the meaning of life? It's never in the answer. It's always in the question, in the questioning of it, because the questioning of it is what brings you into the journey. And life is simply a journey. That's all it is. It's a journey with one experience after the next, after the next, after the next. And if we see that all experiences are valid and none are better or worse or more right or more wrong or good or bad, then it all just becomes this state of, it's an experience, it's the isness. And then it brings me into this place of, kind of how I felt when I was in agony of, you just have to meet this point of absolute surrender, of softening into. That for me is the best word, because it's kind of like letting go of the it's the exhale. Even if that exhale comes through like, I can't bear it anymore. But there's a letting go in that, and then maybe it's like you fall asleep and it's like, thank God, But I've certainly learned through physical pain that when I breathe into it and soften into it, it eases somehow. It's always, there's the pain and then there's the resistance to the pain that makes it just like doubly, triply, quadruply worse. So my invitation for you today is to, have this conversation with yourself. Have it with a friend. Contemplate, ponder. Who are you? Why are you here? What is this all about for you? But primarily, the reason why I'm offering you this invitation is to bring you into a greater state of expansion. Because if we focus through like the eye of the needle right now, it's going to feel like everything is shit. And what's the point? And humans are terrible. And, it's going to look really bleak. And I think because it's almost like the point of greatest tension is where there's the opportunity for the greatest expansion. It makes me think of, I was listening to this podcast. I unfortunately don't remember his name. It was months ago. And I like this analogy that he said, it's like a slingshot, where you have to pull the slingshot back. It's like tension, because then once you release it, there's like a quantum leap, right? You're propelled forward. but that you need to have these points of tension before you can be propelled into kind of, quantum movement, quantum leaps ahead. And so I think now we're at such a point of tension. My God, it's been unrelenting for these last 4.5 years. Unrelenting, whether you want to look at the world stage or you want to look at it astrologically or you want to look at it like weather-wise or just what people are going through. It's both, incredible and inspiring and brutal and agonizing. And it's the paradox of life, thrown into one little nice lunchbox for you. But I think because we're in these times where the tension is so extreme, the chaos is so poignant, it's so in your face, that now more than ever, we need to go in. We need to come into the state of being, go inwards, settle into the silence, settle into your being. Listen. Tune into the essence of who you are, your spirit, your soul, your infinite self, recognizing you are not just this body. You are not just this vehicle. You are not just the story of your life. And really expanding, not as a way to ignore what is happening, but to be in the process of transmuting it. To be the ultimate cosmic alchemists. Because if we want to change the world, it's not going to necessarily change on a 3D level. Like that takes a lot longer, right? That's kind of the after effect. And right now you could say the 3D world is really just crumbling. All the old systems are crumbling. A lot of the old ways are, people are seeing the illusory nature of it, right? They're not buying into it anymore. How the world is going to change is through a state of being. Because you know how many people, for how many years of well, what can I do? What can I do to change the world? You can change your state of being. You change your state of being and the density of the world, the third dimensional world will eventually change. It will be the reflection of your inner being, right? And so this is where I know I've said it before, we have an immense amount of power to create change, but it's through a state of being. So where can you bring more peace into your life? Where can you bring more of a state of relaxation in your life, even and especially if you're going through hard times? How can you connect more into your heart? How can you soften more? And I include myself in this invitation, as I always do, because we're all here learning this together, right? We're doing this together. It's not just an individual journey. I mean, it is, but if we collectively do it together, we'll know that we're not alone, and then we're going to be the ones that change the world. There's no savior, there's no hero, there's nothing that's coming to do it for us. No one. I think that's an old paradigm too, whether, whatever you're putting on a pedestal or thinking that someone has greater authority than you, that's old hat, right? We're doing this together, and that's a beautiful privilege and a great responsibility. So the invitation is to go into yourself and find, what is the access point for you to expand? To come into your greater nature, into your greater essence, and be curious. If you're like, I haven't a freaking clue, Corinne, be curious. Start being with yourself more, sitting in silence, take walks in nature, journal, watch inspiring podcasts, read inspiring books that make you think, that are thought-provoking, that make you feel something, that bring you into presence, that bring you into contemplation, that bring you into reflection. Because that's where the magic is going to lie. That's where the remembrance is going to take place. It's all already in you. You simply need to remember it. And sometimes we need to clear through the clutter to get there, right? But not because we're trying to get rid of because it's bad. We're clearing it by transmuting it, by loving it, right? So love will always be the thread that weaves itself through everything. So that's the I want to say vague, but it's kind of vast invitation. But as always, just planting seeds. And as always, you can take it or leave it as feels right for you. And just know that you're not alone in the journey. We're doing this together. All right, I'll leave it at that. Loving you from afar. You've been listening to Raw Conversations with Corinne Bloom. Thanks so much for showing up, listening in, and being a part of the conversation with me.